Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Monday, November 18th, 2024. This is the Excerpt. Today, Biden lifts a ban on Ukraine using weapons to strike deep into Russian territory. Plus, how world leaders are approaching the transition from Biden to Trump, and how Trump could face some pushback from within the GOP on Capitol Hill, despite Republicans' trifecta control. The Biden administration has lifted restrictions that had blocked Ukraine from using U.S.-provided weapons to strike deep into Russian territory. That's according to a Reuters report citing three sources familiar with the matter. The move marks a change to U.S. policy in the conflict. Ukraine plans to conduct its first long-range attacks in the coming days, the sources said, without revealing details due to operational security concerns. The move comes after months of requests by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to allow Ukraine's military to use U.S. weapons to hit Russian military targets far from its own border, and after Russia's deployment of North Korean ground troops to supplement its own forces. President Joe Biden will make his final appearance at the Group of 20 summit this week in Brazil as world leaders shift their attention from Biden back to President-elect Donald Trump. I spoke with USA Today White House correspondent Francesca Chambers for more on how leaders around the world are bidding farewell to Biden and getting set to approach a new Trump era. Francesca, always happy to have you on. Thanks for making the time.
Thank you so much.
So just starting here, Francesca, really, who are some of the world leaders who have kind of rushed to reach out to Trump in the weeks since his election victory?
Oh my gosh, Taylor, who hasn't rushed to reach out to Trump? Might be a shorter list. More than 80 leaders in the very first few days after Trump won the U.S. election called him on the phone. And some of the first ones who got in touch with him were the Israeli Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, as well as Ukraine's leader, Vladimir Zelensky. Then, of course, you saw European leaders who were close behind. You had France's Emmanuel Macron. You also had Keir Starmer, who's the Prime Minister of the UK. So many world leaders trying to talk to him. And by the way, several world leaders who've also asked for meetings with him already.
Interesting. And he did already have one or two of those meetings, correct, Francesca?
He already met with the Argentine president, Javier Milei. So that happened at Mar-a-Lago. Milei was going to be there for a conservative conference already, but he spoke at a gala at Mar-a-Lago that Trump was also at, and the two leaders took turns praising each other. Taylor, it's important to know that Milei is one of the leaders who has been elected since Donald Trump first held office. He was inaugurated about a year ago, and he has been compared to Trump for his views, his conservatism, and also because he has cut government jobs and he's really tried to tamp down inflation in his country. So this could be a more robust alliance with Argentina than you've seen under the previous administration.
Well, Francesca, you're right that many do appear to be taking a different approach to the previous Trump term in office. What else are you hearing? How so?
The way that it's been different, Taylor, is that they were slow to embrace Donald Trump the first time around. But this time, leaders are more prepared. Dating back to the NATO summit over the summer, when Joe Biden, you might recall, just before that had faced off against Donald Trump in the debate, didn't go so well for him, and then he ended up dropping out of the presidential race a short time after. So they were already prepared heading into that Washington summit for a situation in which Donald Trump could wind up being president again. They have had months since the NATO summit to begin preparations for what a Trump administration could look like. That could include slapping tariffs on both Europe and on China, as well as Trump pulling back from some key alliances. He said that he wants Europe to pay more for Ukraine's defense, and there have been some questions about how robust his support would be for the NATO alliance.
Francesca, can you help us understand this transition period we're now in from Biden to Trump? You know, the U.S. has this long stretch of time every 4 years. It's kind of unique compared to the rest of the world in that way. I'm curious, how do world leaders navigate now balancing relationships with the current Biden administration and the incoming Trump team?
Taylor, as you noted, there's a months-long stretch where there is only one president of the United States, and that is Joe Biden. But there is also a president-elect, and that is now Donald Trump. So you've seen some world leaders in the same exact week meet with Joe Biden, but then also seek those meetings with Donald Trump. At the White House last week, you saw the Indonesian president Prabowo Subianto meet with Joe Biden. He is a G20 leader. You saw the Japanese prime minister do the same thing, meet with Joe Biden at APEC while at the same time ask for a meeting with Donald Trump. So some leaders have tried to split the difference here.
So, Francesca, as for Donald Trump himself, I mean, what are some of the early signals from him about how he'll approach these relationships we've been talking about around the world?
Well, you can look at some of the picks that he's made for foreign policy, both for his cabinet and his White House, and their backgrounds as well as their views on foreign policy to draw some potential conclusions about what he might try to do when he is in office. Look at Marco Rubio, his Secretary of State pick. Now, Marco Rubio is also someone who, in the last year, has pulled back on his support for Ukraine when it comes to the U.S. sending military assistance. He has said that the U.S. should be worried about its own borders. And when asked earlier in the week about how Donald Trump would solve the war between Russia and Ukraine, he said that that would be up to Donald Trump. Trump notably has said that he would solve it one day, maybe even before he gets into office, but has said little else about how he plans to get it done. So, embassies, foreign governments, even the sitting administration is looking to Donald Trump's picks to try and figure out what stances he might end up taking.
All right, should be an interesting next few weeks. Francesca Chambers, White House correspondent with USA Today. Francesca, I always appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Taylor.
As Donald Trump retakes the White House, climate change experts are preparing for another 4-year fight. They'll face a presidency that's widely expected to downplay the risks of a warming world and will look to Democratic governors and mayors to again pick up the fight, along with environmental nonprofits. During his first term, Trump prioritized oil and gas development and softened efforts to fight climate change, including withdrawing from the Paris Climate Accords. He has promised to again prioritize the nation's economy over fighting climate change. Last summer was the hottest since people began taking instrument readings in the 1800s, and tree ring studies show it was the hottest in at least 2,000 years. Climate experts say extreme heat alone causes thousands of deaths annually in the United States, on top of the billions of dollars in damage caused by climate change-strengthened hurricanes and wildfires. In his Election Day victory speech, Trump said, quote, "We have more liquid gold than any country in the world," unquote, highlighting his plans for more oil and gas extraction, which he argues will bring prices down at the gas pump and grocery store. Trump announced that he would name former New York Congressman Lee Zeldin to run the Environmental Protection Agency. In announcing the appointment, he said that Zeldin will ensure fair and swift deregulatory decisions in a way to bring power to American businesses while also maintaining environmental standards, including what he called the cleanest air and water on the planet. You can read more with a link in today's show notes. Even amid a unified GOP government, Trump will have to face some intra-party detractors when he begins his second term in January. I spoke with USA Today Congress, campaigns, and democracy reporter Sadiksha Kochi for more. Hello, Sadiksha. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So as you wrote, Sadiksha, Trump could, get some pushback from members of his own party, even with this trifecta control in Washington. Let's start with folks at either end of the GOP political spectrum in the House. Who are some of the figures we're really thinking about?
In terms of moderates, the figures that we're really thinking about are vulnerable House Republicans who won in tight races this year. So we're looking at Don Bacon of Nebraska, Michael Lawler of New York, and David Valadao of California. We're actually very critical to the Republican Party retaining control of the House this year. We're seeing that these lawmakers will probably take a more moderate policy approach against Trump's more partisan agenda as they eye the 2026 midterm elections when all of the House seats are up for re-election. And so going down the list, in terms of Bacon, he previously drew Trump's anger after voting in support of President Joe Biden's $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill in 2021. And he's also criticized Trump for the January 6, 2021 Capitol attack. So he could definitely be jousting with Trump on those issues. In terms of Lawler, he told me that when he agrees with the president, he'll say it. If he disagrees on something, he'll say that too. So he does look like he will push back against Trump on some ideas. These lawmakers are really calling for bipartisanship. And so Lawler in particular did knock his party last year for derailing a funding plan to avoid a government shutdown. And so these moderate lawmakers will definitely be looking for more of that, especially as Trump brings in his more partisan agenda. On the ultra conservative side, the person that we're really looking at is Chip Roy. And so Roy actually campaigned for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis during the 2024 presidential primaries. And during that time, he actually bashed Trump for failing to secure the border in his first term. When I spoke with Roy, he said that he's going to agree with the president 9 times out of 10. I will note with Chip Roy, it's interesting because he was one of the few conservative firebrands who voted to certify the 2020 election. And so I think Trump will definitely be facing some opposition from him. The other person that we're really looking at is Representative Thomas Massie, who also campaigned for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis during the primaries. And he also knocked House Speaker Mike Johnson's foreign policy and labeled him a neocon, even after Trump had endorsed him. So we will definitely be expecting, pushback from Chip Roy and Thomas Massie on the ultra-conservative side.
And as for the Senate, there are clearly already some major Republican voices who haven't always cozied up to Trump there. Who are we talking about on this chamber, Sadiksha? And largely speaking, do we expect the Senate's GOP arm to cooperate with the Trump agenda?
We will see pushback, I think, from the Senate, especially as it's a very fertile ground for conflict. I think with senators, they typically have the final say in a lot of things, especially as Trump is choosing a lot of these House members and others for cabinet positions. What's interesting is that Tom Tillis, who is up for re-election in 2026, he is a Trump supporter, but when Trump had selected Matt Gaetz, who's a Florida representative, as Attorney General, he, didn't not immediately agree to confirm Gaetz. And so that was pretty interesting. The other people that we expect pushback from is Susan Collins. She actually voted to convict Trump in his 2021 impeachment trial in the Senate, and she also refused to endorse his presidential bids. And what's interesting about her is that she could potentially head the Senate Appropriations Committee, and she could slow or stop many of the funding demands that Trump has. The other people that we're really eyeing here are Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and then Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who have also been very outspoken on Trump. They've previously knocked his anti-immigration rhetoric, and Murkowski in particular has expressed very strong support for codifying Roe v. Wade, which directly clashes with Trump's view that abortion should be left up to the states. I think a majority of Republican senators will probably cooperate with Trump, but we will expect to see pushback from these particular senators and even some that are up for re-election in the 2026 midterm elections.
All right, Sadiksha Kochi covers Congress, campaigns, and democracy for USA Today. Thank you, Sadiksha.
Thank you, Taylor.
Thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio, and if you're on a smart speaker, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.